Hey, good morning, everybody. Happy weekend to you guys. This is Soapbox Slam, where I get on my soapbox and I talk about the things that I see going on. Today I want to talk about an article that I read in the USA Today. That's a paper that I have ordered and subscribed to and read quite often, actually. The little story behind that is that my grandmother loves to do the crosswords, and she always got her USA Today, as well as other papers, but particularly USA Today, to do crosswords. So I'm a little nostalgic, I guess, and loyal to the sense that that's part of the reason why I go to that particular newspaper to read articles out of. Just something that my grandparents constantly read. USA Today, their local paper, and then sometimes the Journal and sometimes the New York Times, which are, aside from the local journals or periodicals, local newspapers, I pretty much stick to USA Today, the New York Times, and the Wall Street Journal. So the article I read in the USA Today was written by a lady named Deborah Barfield Berry. It was an article titled "Museums Bring Back Black History to Life." And I wanted to talk about this and get on my soapbox to talk about this because it's a very well written article. It actually, in the culture section, it took up, and it was pretty much a whole page and then a half, so it was good reading. And I read the article. There were a couple pictures in the article, or read read it, and there were a couple pictures, the passage, and there were a couple pictures that were also posted in this particular writing. And first of all, Deborah Barfield Berry is a black lady. She usually covers voters' rights, civil rights, and politics. And like I said, it was a well-written piece. I mean, certainly kudos to to a writer who actually can write well, right? Lord knows our standards of education have completely deteriorated, and I have my personal opinions about that, but the standards for education have completely deteriorated, and it's all that's left in the sophisticated minds and well-educated minds are in the older generations. So that's my personal opinion about that. But again, the article was titled "Museums Bring Back Black History to Life." And I wanted to pose this question to you guys, right? I posed this question particularly to many black people out there who may or may not catch this. I'd love your feedback, but I do pose this question to the black community. I mean, it's not limited to the black community, but in my personal opinion, the majority of you other people, whites, Asians, and Hispanics, y'all really don't give a fuck about what's going on with black people anyway. So if you have an opinion about what this topic is, great. I'd love to hear it. But my assumption, which I'm pretty sure is right, majority of you guys really don't care. So whatever. But I pose this question to the people who do care. As African Americans, right? Should we frame our story in America to continue to make statues of Africans in chains? Right? The question I'm getting at here is, why should we continue to make all of our history to be about us, our images, our history, our everything, to be about African people in chains, right? Chains, literal chains, shackled. It's this constant image that I see in movies, I see in statues, and I think one of the most dangerous places to see it is in statues, because statues last forever. I mean, think about all of the statues in history, whether they be Egyptian statues, whether they be Grecian statues or Roman statues, you don't see a chain anywhere. You don't see shackles anywhere. You don't see, and those people had slaves. They certainly had indentured servants and slaves throughout all of that. I mean, look at the Egyptians and the Hebrews, right? Not Jews. It's very important that you people always remember Hebrews and Jews are different. Very, very different. And even though Jewish people like to claim Hebrewism and everything else, the majority, certainly the Ashkenazi Jews, Ashkenazi Jews, they don't even speak Hebrew. They know Hebrew because it's something that they mandate as far as teaching in their schools. But they speak Yiddish, not Hebrew. They're not real Hebrews. They're adopted Hebrews, in my opinion. But I mean, just follow the history of it. Really dig into it and stop allowing that. But that's a different thing. What I'm really on my soapbox here about, honestly, is this the image that we want to continue to portray? And I suggest, and listen, I am all for black causes. I am all for spending money in black communities. Hell, I'm probably way more for black causes than the majority of people, because I probably lean more towards separatism and segregation than I do this integration, because in my opinion, integration has destroyed the fabric and foundation of the black soul and the black community. Integration has destroyed us. And many people may be, what the hell are you talking about, Sean? Before integration, black people had their own doctors, believe it or not. We had way more percentages of doctors. I mean, you can look at the interview that Don Lemon did with Elon Musk. We black doctors are less than I think it's 5% or 1% of the entire population of doctors. So we have other people who don't have our same anatomy, who don't have our same issues, diagnosing us and everything else. Wouldn't it make better sense that we have our own people diagnosing us? Hence, because they know the grief that we go through, or our lifestyles, or the things that where we come from, the things that we suffer and everything else. There is no way a white doctor is going to understand what an inner city child is dealing with. All he's going to do is, anyways, that's a whole different topic. The point I'm trying to make is, in this particular soapbox, because I'm all about pro-black issues and fighting for black causes, but I'm also fair across the board, right? I call a spade a spade. If something's wrong, it's wrong. And if something is underdeveloped or undereducated or misinformed or misguided, I'm going to call it out. And quite frankly, while this was a wonderful article, absolutely wonderful article by Deborah Barfield Berry, I strongly disagree with the images and the visual implications that are constantly being thrown in our faces. And that image is of black Africans in chains. We need to ditch the chains. I'm not saying don't tell the story. I'm not saying don't acknowledge that history. I'm not saying that at all. But what I'm saying is our images of servitude seem to dominate all of our images in the world. It seems to be the go-to promising image that we have, and it doesn't foster and garner confidence and strength in our own psyche. I mean, these are just visual quick images. When you see statues and tons of statues all over the country. I mean, one of the things in this article, it talked about all the museums all over the country, all over by black communities, from Alabama to Texas to Chicago to DC, the Smithsonian. I mean, all the museums. It's a well-written article, and it talks about what's in these articles. It doesn't give you all the information of all the architecture or all the artwork or human expression through art that is in all of these museums, right? It doesn't, and artifacts. It does not explain. The article does not divulge all that information, right? But it does divulge enough information, and a majority of the images that it presents are images in all of these museums of black people, Africans in chains. That to me psychologically sends the absolute wrong message. I'm not saying abandon the idea that we were enslaved people. I'm not saying that at all. And I'm not saying forget about that history. But to me, something that is way more effective image-wise, visual images and visual implication. Imagine you see this glory, and I don't know if there's one exists or not. This was just as someone who has some sort of creative mind. If I wish I had the creative ability to execute the ideas that were in my creative mind sometimes. But imagine the kind of visual implication that you would get that if you saw an image of all of the slaves that actually built the White House. What if that was an amazing painting, some sort of mural, and you see, what you see is black people building the number one house in the nation, right? Like, imagine that as an artistic image. To me, the visual implications of seeing something like, oh wow, all these black people built the most recognizable, most notorious building in America and the world. Everyone knows what the Capitol building looks like. Everybody knows what the White House looks like. Everyone knows what the obelisk or the Washington Monument looks like. You know, everybody knows these images. What they don't know, and we only know through history and reading, especially if you're educated, is that it was black slaves who built that stuff. So why, if you are an artist and you are trying to put out an image and a visual implication, why you can still make the point that these are slaves, but we're the ones who built that? Imagine the historical long history after the world is gone and the only thing that's left behind is some oil painting on canvas or some bust or something like that, is the image of black people building monuments. It would erase who was in power, that being white people, because the only image that you would see is black people who built this. You know, imagine the hieroglyphics that you see. The image that the visual implication that you would be left upon you would be, oh, black people built this. Black people built this. The visual implication, if a man from outer space came down and looked at all of the statues that are built, their immediate assumption is going to be, oh, those people belong in chains. Look at all the statues of them in chains. We know what it means to us because we're fighting against that historical plight on humanity. It's not just a plight on African Americans. It's not just a plight on America. It's a plight in humanity, right? This is a human, disgusting trait. But imagine the implication that some unbelievable being came down and saw, oh, black people in chains, or people who have these characteristics belong in chains. That is the visual implication that you constantly put out when the majority of your images are you in shackles. I think it's wrong, my personal opinion. So I pose that question to you. What do you feel about that? Every time you see all of these paintings and statues and everything, and all of the images, whether it's in movies, it's always black people chains, black people chains. You can still tell the story of being enslaved and being indentured. You can still tell that story and spin it in a way that shows our strength, like the example I just gave. Some sort of painting or mural that shows all the things that we built even though we were enslaved and servitude, right? Why not make those kind of images? Why not present that forward? So one of the things in the article, which it mentions, not necessarily the position I'm taking right now, but it does pose the question in the article. As I said, I pose the question to you. As African Americans, should we continue to frame our story of Africans in chains? Should we continue to do that? Should Africans in chains continue to be how we lead our artistic expression, our mark in humanity? Is that really what we want to do coming out of America? Like, is that really what we're going for here? You know, I think that there's many ways to spin and present our servitude, and I think we fail at doing that. And I think it has really disastrous consequences in visual implications and mental psyche. But I also, in the article, there was a line that was stated. She said one of the challenges, Deborah Barfield Berry says, one of the challenges in all these museums is to curate the story today, to curate the African American story, right? Who picks these stories? Who tells the story? What stories should have grand institutions, right? And when she says what stories should have grand institutions, right? There were many small towns that were, especially in segregation, many small towns that were predominantly African American towns, and they were prosperous and upwardly mobile towns. This is where I get back into the idea of segregation and integration. The biggest issue about integration was separate but equal. The reason why, see, these honkies and you white people, y'all fucked up, because you guys could have maintained segregation had you truly allowed things to be separate but equal. If you had, because the issue was we weren't getting the same education by not getting the same books, outdated technology, outdated money and services for our own water fountains. If you honkies, you dumbass white people would have allowed and spent the money equally, then black people would have been prosperous. It's your fault we're integrated. So all you bigots and all you racist people who are all upset about us being all melting and everything else, it's your fault, because we would have been separate but equal had you been equal. You were not equal, which is why black people forced civil rights down your throat. Now think about it like that, because the truth of the matter, when it comes to integration, there was way more success when we were segregated. Way more doctors, way more teachers, way more lawyers, way more bankers, way more grocery stores, way more farmers, way more where we were able to sustain ourselves. We had to, because we were segregated. Now we're lost in the shuffle and dependent upon someone else to determine whether or not how many hours a week we're gonna get, whether or not everything. It was a big mistake. It was needed, but it was also a mistake. But this isn't about integration. That's a whole different discussion I'm willing to have when it comes to integration and segregation in the black community. This topic is more about the museums and the images that are presented in a lot of artwork. And my question is to black people: do you think that this is the right way to go? Should our images constantly be us in chains? I personally don't think so, but I would love to hear your opinion. And what I was saying was, and I got off on a little tangent, is what stories should be grand institutions. And I was saying that, there were tons of black towns all over the country that were upwardly mobile. Grand institutions would be who determines that the Tulsa riots and Tulsa was the Black Wall Street. Who determines that kind of story? Because there was Roswell, there was all these other ones. There's a reason why, and collectively the NAACP, whoever it was, determined that this was the most egregious. The Tulsa riots. So, and that's a very fair question. But I think that we have been limited in telling our stories, and we have only focused on and really have played the victim of shackles and chains as if it is the most impactful image. And it's not. It's actually an image that everybody is numb to. Nobody cares anymore. Nobody cares. It's not impactful. And I think it's because it's overused. I think it's not effective. I don't think that it's been used so much and everything else that it has lost its meaning. It has lost its effect. So yeah, I mean, also one of the other things I would say about all of these museums and the amount of money that's going into making these museums, whether it's private or grant money or whatever else, all of the money that's going into these museums, right? There's tons of them all over this country at this point. The most notable one at this point, or the most poignant one, which I think should exist, is the one that's a part of the Smithsonian, right? Because that's our national identity, our national history through the Smithsonian, our national archives, our national artifacts, all through the Smithsonian in the Capitol, right? So that's an important one. But the question about that, I have this, and I pose this, is not to be a smart ass or rude. Like, fair across the board, I'm going to criticize the African American community when I think something's wrong, but I am still a proponent of the African American community. Who is the target audience for museums at this point, right? How often do black people go to museums? What kind of money is required excess money, disposable income, prosperity. How much prosperity do you need in order to go to these museums that are targeted for Black communities? Because if they're targeted for people in the inner cities, it's very hard for a person in the inner city who's working to, especially a working poor, it's very hard for them to come up with $25 per kid and themselves and take them to one of these museums. The point I'm getting at is that it's kind of expensive. So who's the target audience for these museums? Because if you think you're going to make a lot of money because of your museum, you're going to make the money off of rich white people and affluent and upwardly mobile, upper middle class white people. And the question is, how endeared are those white people really going to be to go to a Black museum? I mean, I think we all know, not a lot. The ones who actually do care about humanity, the ones who actually do care about human existence, are going to spend the money and go and show appreciation and support. But that's far and few between. That's very far and few between. I can tell you right now, hell, I know biracial people, mixed people who want nothing to do with Black people. They're part Black. I mean, they have no attention to Black culture. They have no identity with Black culture at all. They aren't going to do anything to go into Black culture and spend money on Black stuff and teach their children or anything else like on Black issues. What do you think the majority of white people who are bigoted or white people who are prejudiced going to do? They're going to go and spend their money to go look at Black causes. So I guess what I'm saying here is the target audience, right? Who is your target audience? I mean, you think that Black people are going to go, but do they have the capital and prosperity to go? White people aren't going to go because the majority of white people don't care. The majority of white, Hispanics, Asians, they don't care what's going on with us. They don't care to help us. They don't care about our cause at all. So, you know, it's very, who is your demographic? I would agree the demographic would be African-American people. And in saying that, and I'm going to wrap this up, there's a lot of money that goes into building all these museums and everything else. I think that money should be redirected. I'm sorry that there's so many and we got to fund all this stuff now, and it's funded by private money and grant money, and we're relying on basically subsidies to maintain all of these museums everywhere. I think it should be consolidated. The stuff should be consolidated. I think memorials and memorials and plaques are important, and all over the country, not just in the museums. But I think that there should be a consolidation in the museums, and I think that in addition to that, just like when I was in high school and in grade school, you had the eighth grade trip to DC, right? And all the kids got to go to the nation's capital, right? Well, I think an assertive effort by the NAACP and all of these different companies, like what was the name of one? I forget. I guess I didn't write it down. All of these different organizations, nonprofit organizations and everything else, fundraisers, trusts, and everything else that keep throwing money at the museums are throwing it at the wrong thing. A consolidated effort like the senior class trip to Washington Monument, a consolidated effort to fund every Black child in every school, whether he's in an integrated school or an urban city school, for a Black History Month trip to the Smithsonian or another major institute and museum, and like a senior class trip, it's the Black History class trip. And no, most of these Black students may not have the money to have a big trip to Washington D.C. Smithsonian, so the grant and the funding should be poured into getting these kids to these museums, and having the instructors with them both, right? And having the instructors with them that can talk to the kids, because you're going to see this stuff and it's going to make you angry, and you need a psychological decompression and a psychological sophisticated discussion with 8th graders and seniors about this stuff as you're going to go see it. And an assertive effort by the NAACP and all of these funds that are building all these museums, stop wasting the money that way, because the target audience that you want to come see it isn't getting there. Start getting the target audience there. Start spending the money on that to get them there. Yes, I think it's important that we have museums. Yes, I think it's important that we have museums that include the African American contribution. Absolutely, it's unbelievably important. And we need these things, but it's equally important to spend just as much effort getting our people in front of the information, because I guarantee you the majority of this information is missing the target audience. So anyways, that's what I'm on my soapbox about. It was an interesting article that I had read in the USA Today. Like I said, the article was titled Museums Bring Black History to Life. It was written by Deborah Barfield Berry. And my question and purpose of this soapbox and me getting on my soapbox is posing the question to African American community and the people who care. Do you think it's a good image to constantly keep seeing Africans in chains? I mean, statues of Africans in shackles, paintings of African in shackles. Do you think that this is the right image? This is the visual implications we want to continue to go with? That's the question I pose to you all. I personally do not. Have a wonderful day. Have a beautiful weekend. Do an act of kindness for somebody, right? It snowed out here. I got back to my house because we got snowed out, and one of my neighbors was an elderly lady, and she was snowed in, and so I shoveled my driveway and I shoveled her, right? One act of kindness, right? Do something kind for someone. Do an act of kindness. Just spread kindness around. All right? Have a wonderful day. Have a wonderful weekend. And I'll get back with you.